Well, it's really a pleasure to be here, where I met Meher Baba. Meher Center will always be the most special place, because here I had the great fortune to meet Meher Baba. And most people usually ask me about how I met Baba, and so bear with me if some of you have heard the story before. I thought perhaps for newcomers it would be interesting, my little journey to Baba, which actually began, like most of you, or most of all of us, with a search for meaning in life, which I began, long ago, and went through the various stages that were available at that time. Philosophy in college I majored in, and I was very interested in Jungian psychology, and then went into a study on my own, mostly from old books and secondhand bookstores, into Buddhism, Hinduism, and Christian mysticism, and so forth. There were really not available then the mass of literature you all have now, reprinted and study groups and so on, but I still would read these things and say, I'd like to meet someone who had this consciousness that is talked about. And especially towards the end, I got very interested in Sri Ramakrishna, who was a perfect master of the last century. And especially the words, two things that he said were very important to me. He said, seek the lotus feet of the living master. And also that, remember, that love for God is the most important thing. And it was that love I felt from him that made me want to find someone who had that love. And I had many, many inner experiences before I met Baba, but one that was most significant was one day I went to the Ramakrishna Center in New York, where I had enjoyed the talks by Swami Nikhilananda, who translated the Gospels of Sri Ramakrishna. But this time, I looked at the picture of Sri Ramakrishna that they had, and it just blanked out. It became a sort of white light, and I heard a voice say, coming out of the picture, "He is your Jesus." And I turned and looked, and coming on the platform just like this was the figure of a man. This was just as real as anything else, a person in a long white garment and with flowing auburn hair, very dynamic eyes, and he was speaking, and he was speaking in Aramaic. And I could also know the meaning of it in English as he was speaking. And it was the Sermon on the Mount. And I can't duplicate it for you in Aramaic, but he was so beautiful, and I was just fascinated. And then it was over, and I looked up, and the whole congregation was leaving, so it must have been an hour, because they usually had hour talks. And I didn't know what to make of it. And about 2 weeks later, I got this mysterious invitation in the mail from Princess Machiavelli to come to hear a talk on Meher Baba, which was in the old Hotel Martinique in New York. I went, but at that talk, they had no pictures of Baba, but Narina came on stage. And here again was another very interesting thing. I had seen inwardly several faces of people. One of them was of a woman with a white turban on and very black piercing eyes. And the minute I saw Narina, I knew that this was the person I'd seen inwardly, just maybe a few months before that. And another woman was at the door, greeting people. And she too was someone I had seen in a vision or dream or whatever you want to call it. She had blue eyes and white hair. And she had said in this dream, "Attendez le maître parfait." which means wait for the perfect master. And there she was. This was Countess Tolstoy. I didn't see Elizabeth at that meeting, but they invited me to their home. And I think it was Nadine she was always the one that talked to newcomers. And her room was filled with Baba pictures. And when I saw this one picture that still is one of my favorites, it was the same man that I had seen on the platform at the Ramakrishna Center. So I always feel that Ramakrishna had helped me find Baba, as masters do. And of course I was, from then on, totally interested in MeherBaba. And I got very close to Narina and Elizabeth. It seemed like instant karma. And Nadine. But this was in 1943, the beginning of 1943. And at that time, I know you know the story of Baba. They expected Baba to come and break his silence and all that. We were very excited about it. But actually, as years went by, as you know, Baba didn't come until 1952. Meanwhile, Elizabeth was getting the center ready, she and Narina. And I lived here with them and was on the center before anything was built. It was just wild. And we were preparing the center for Baba. And then Baba went into the new life phase. And at that time he'd said, well, there's, I don't know whether 90% chance he'd give up the body and so on. I thought, oh my, I'll never meet Baba. And it was during the war, we couldn't travel there, and Baba didn't come here. So it was almost, well, it was 9 years before I actually met Baba. And finally in 1952, Baba was coming. And all the preparations have been made for his visit here. And my friend Adele was the only one of my peers that took an interest in Baba. I had really, in a sense, to drop all my young friends away. They thought I was a little bit crazy. You know, this was the era of Marx and Freud. You know, if you were interested in God, you were only searching for your father, or you didn't have a good sex life or something. You know? And but we knew where Baba was going to come. He had to come and take the train in Penn Station. There was only this one-night train to Myrtle Beach, to Florence, South Carolina. So we decided to hide in the station and get a glimpse of Baba. Nobody was supposed to see Baba till they called. But anyway, we hid in the station. In the old station, this giant place of 3 stories. And we were hiding behind the pillars there. And Adele was the first to put her head out. She said, oh, there's Baba, and there's Meher, and there's Dr. Duncan. And Baba, meanwhile, had taken out his board, maybe Julia. He knew we were up there. And another funny little thing was we were hiding behind this pillar, and suddenly, about 2 feet away, Margaret walks past, very solemn looking. She didn't see us at all. It turned out later Baba had sent her to get some aspirin or something. We thought it was so funny because we knew Margaret, but so anyway, I felt a little guilty. We were disobeying Baba, and I got real upset. I hadn't stuck my head out. I didn't see Baba, but Dell did, and she was describing him. Anyway, finally, we get a letter from Baba, and Baba says, would you like to come and spend 3 weeks with me at the center? So we wrote back and said, oh yes, Baba. Then comes another letter. Its plans are changed. Only 2 weeks. Yes, Baba. And finally, the third letter was 1 week. Well, you know, we were very lucky, both of us, to have learned so much from those 3 women and Dr. Duncan and others, a little bit about Baba and how he tests you with these changes of plans and everything. So we weren't upset by changes. We're very happy to be here at all with Baba. So we came down, and on May 10th, 1952, I met Baba in the lagoon cabin, And it was Delia de Leon who introduced me and said, Shri Meher Baba, this is Filis Frederick. And of course, that was about 9:30 in the morning. And I had thought, well, I would see him and remember him as Jesus or Buddha or so forth. But my first glimpse of Baba, I said to myself involuntarily, he looks Egyptian. And I got this embrace from Baba. That was his first thing, was to embrace you, this wonderful hug, and then look into his eyes. And he beckoned me to sit down. And he said, I know you. I've heard about you from Elizabeth and Margaret and so on, and I've heard you from within. And he said, do you love me? And I said, yes, Baba. This is Baba always asks, do you love me? And then he made me feel where this love was coming from. It was like I felt the love flow from him into my heart and back to him, you know, like the circulation of the light or whatever. And I never thought since then that I love Baba. The love I have for Baba is his gift. And as you know, he says in Beams that God gives the gift of his love to the lover and forgets the gift so that he can enjoy the love from his lover. And then he called Adele in and embraced her, and we had just that short first wonderful moment with Baba. And then he beckoned, and by this time I could feel what he meant. Beckoned, and we went across the bridge and we met Mira and Mani and the other Mandalay, women Mandalay. And getting that embrace from Mira was just like a second embrace from Baba. That was a wonderful moment. And meeting his sister was like really meeting your own family. They were such wonderful. And that's where I first met Kitty and Rano and all the others. Baba had come with 6 women and 6 men in 52. And we spent a whole week here on the center with Baba. And that was like the high point. And Baba treated myself and Adele just like his children. We were very spoiled by Baba. And it reminds me of what Charmian said. He said, when Baba spoils you, you're in the kindergarten. And for example, one day we were helping Kitty, I guess, wipe the silver or something in the dining room. And the phone rang, and it was Rana with a message from Baba. Phyllis and Adele are not to do anything on the center. In other words, we were just his guests. We weren't allowed to do anything. And another thing that Baba did every morning, he'd look at you like this. He'd go like this, which means, how did you sleep? You see. And that was kind of amusing because I wasn't really sleeping too well here. I was having all sorts of dreams and visions and stuff. I think Margaret put it very well. She said, Baba works with you in the way that's good for you. And since I'd always been interested in dreams and the Jungian analysis of symbols and all, so Baba gave me what I enjoyed, I guess, which was a whole bunch of experiences like that, dreams. And he'd ask me then in the evening when we sat in the guest house with the women to tell a dream, tell any dream that I'd had the night before, and then he would say something about it. And that went on almost every night. And some of these dreams were very interesting. Like one of them was, I had this dream where I saw a giant turtle, just a giant turtle, but it had Baba's eyes. And then a giant snake, and it had Baba's eyes. And then an elephant with Baba's eyes, such kind and gentle eyes. And then a huge tree that you couldn't see the top of, and I put my hand on it, and I felt Baba. It's Baba. So Baba looked at me and said, well, now that you see me in everything, you will be afraid of nothing. And then I had another dream of being here at the center, hundreds of years from now. And I was running along the center. It was all built up with these beautiful buildings and everything. And I come to this little cabin, and I go in, and I feel the wall, this old pine wall. And I said, I know I've been here before. And I wake up, and there's the same wall, but it's 1952. And then I went back in the dream, went into the future again. So it was like Baba showing me, I'll be here in the future in another life, and the center will be all built up. And Baba liked that dream too. Anyway, that was how Baba worked with me. And then during the day, we spent time with Baba. We walked on the beach in the morning with the women. And that's where Baba, the only thing in this whole week with Baba that you might say where Baba gave me a little hard time. Because otherwise, he was more than sweet to me in every way. I was walking with the girls, and I got talking to Meher. We were just talking together. And Baba had walked far ahead. And I had seen his footsteps in the sand, and I thought, oh, how groovy, I'll just walk in Baba's footsteps. So I followed his footsteps in the sand, and I came up to him, and he had been leaning over, he had put his cane down on the ground. And I have a very good sense of direction and also lived here. It was pointed sort of southwest. West-southwest. And when I stood up, his eyes were very strange, very sad and concerned eyes. And then he held out his hand like that, and there was a shell in it. And I heard his voice say, give this shell to Meher. And I didn't stop till hours later to realize, of course, Baba didn't speak. He just made me hear this. So I went back to Muir, and I gave her the shell, and she was very happy. It turned out she was collecting shells for her to take back to India. And then we got talking again. And then Baba came back, and they were all gesturing in Gujarati, and Baba's eyes were flashing. He was pointing to me, and then Mani translated, Baba was very angry. Why didn't Filis show the way back to the center? We had passed the path, And I didn't know I was supposed to show the way back to the center. But talking to Meher, but it seemed, and I didn't know that, everybody waited for Meher. They weren't going to move anywhere until Meher moved somewhere. And we had just been talking. So my mind starts spinning around. Oh, I did the wrong thing. I didn't show them where they were supposed to go. I didn't know the path, all sorts of stuff. And then Baba said, Filis, stop worrying. And I couldn't. My mind was spinning around. 3 times Baba said that. And then finally he called me, and he took my arm, and he took it like that, the left hand, and I felt this kind of a charge go up and blanked out my mind. And I was so happy. I didn't think anything about it. And I didn't even remember till I tried to describe to Adele what had happened. She wasn't there that morning. I think she was looking after Narina. I'm not sure. But something. And after that, I've never been able to worry. It's like Baba gave me the worry operation. And you see, Baba created this sort of artificial mistake. I didn't know. But this fact that he laid his cane on the ground and all that, I realized, of course, after the accident, he must have been, I felt, doing something in an occult way, laying this cane in the direction which he was going to go, and his eyes are very serious. And I even felt, this is just an interpretation, when he gave me the shell to give to Meher, there was some significance about what was going to happen to Meher. I don't know how to explain it, but there was something. And actually, I think Baba kind of drew me to him alone on the beach. I don't know, just one of those. You always felt around Baba that lots of things were happening that you didn't understand. Even when he called us in the lagoon cabin before the open day, May 17th, he gave each of us a little job to do. And I remember he looked so beautiful. This was before all the accidents. And he was lying there on the lounge, you know, and giving each one a little task. And I could feel the air was just filled with all sorts of invisible beings, you know, that he was giving orders to, you know. Besides us, I can't describe it, but it was a very important thing. Baba never called all of us together just for us. Obviously, things were going on all planes. And little hints were given, like we had brought a camera, and I took a few pictures of Baba, but I soon felt, well, I don't want to take pictures of Baba, I want to just absorb Baba. And then we thought of giving the camera to Mani, and her eyes sparkled, you know, but you always give something to Baba first. You don't give it, because Baba gives it to whoever he wants. So Baba looked very serious. She said, "Can you afford, is this an expensive camera?" "No, Baba." "You sure you don't want this camera?" "No, Baba." And that was the only thing destroyed in the accident, was that camera was completely wrecked. Another time we were sitting in the evening, and Baba said, "Think of a number from 1 to 22. And all around the room we all tried to think of a number, and it was Adele who said 11. And she said later she felt Baba's putting the number in her head. And it was just 11 days from that night that Baba had the accident. So there were little hints. But most of the time Baba was very relaxed with us. In fact, it was Kitty who said, "I haven't seen Baba like this since the early days." We was like Krishna, you said, you know, with the gopis. And I thought later, what fantastic control Baba had to act with us, so happy and lighthearted, to think of little things to make us happy, when his mind must have been planning this tremendous accident and all that it entailed. And so he would ask us to tell jokes, and I'm terrible at jokes, you know. Or tell stories. So one night he asked Adele and I to give a story of a saint. And she had been studying all these saints, St. Augustine, St. Francis, St. Teresa, and St. Catherine of Siena, and I had too. And she told a story of St. Peter, though, and one of St. Francis, I think. So Baba said, my 4 favorite saints were St. Teresa, Avila, of course, Avila, St. Francis, St. Augustine, and St. Catherine of Siena. And then she told a story about St. Peter. And Baba looked very grave, and he said, St. Peter loved me the most, and even he denied me. And then he went on to say, I think it was Delia who asked him, what about Judas? And Baba said, Judas also loved me, and he also attained realization, God realization. And he had the hardest job to do. But he obeyed me. You know, in other words, he had the order to betray Jesus. He had to act out that role. And I went back and read the New Testament after that, and you know, at the Last Supper, Jesus says, "Go thou and do what thou must do quickly." And it's like that was an order that he had to do. But of course, Baba, in the article on the circle, which is in the Awakening, said that all the members of his circle attain realization. So Judas, of course, is a member of the circle. And there were other beautiful things, moments that Baba gave tiny bits of discourses. I remember one, he said, this love for God is like a sea of fire, and you have to swim through this sea to find me. Or another time, the first words he said to Adele and myself when we had another interview with him was, remember this, and he took his finger and he pointed to his heart like this. Nothing matters but love for God. Only love for God matters. Only God is real. And you know, when Monty was reading the board, but when Baba said something that way, it went inside of you. And you don't even notice that some Mandali's voice is there. And it's like he wrote that on my heart, you know. And the same thing with what he said. It was like the teaching goes into your soul. It's not like, you know, any minister can get up and say it, and they say it all the time, love for God, love for God. Well, Baba said he's putting that love into you. And that's what was so precious. And that's what Baba really meant when he said, I've come not to teach, but to awaken. He's given all this beautiful teaching, but it's the awakening, the gift of love. I mean, why are we all here? Because we love Baba. And that love is just a continuous gift. It's like Adele said, that love is like a package, a gift that I'm still opening, you know, like a Christmas present I'm still opening. And that the hardest thing is to leave Baba when you've been with him. And after this wonderful week here with Baba, I had to go back to a job. And I was standing in the bus station in Myrtle Beach crying, you know. It's like being dropped, you know, out of a jet plane. Terrible feeling. And then the jukebox began to play Begin the Beguine. Anyway, the story of the accident you all know. It was the biggest shock to all of us in New York. It was really a very, very, it was very hard not to be there, we'd hear dribbles of news, you know. It would first come through Ivy, I guess, oh, Baba's been in a terrible accident. And no news of what was, you know, how he was hurt or anything, and that was terrible, you know, not to know. But a strange thing had happened to me when I went back to my job. I had an office where there was a giant sales map on the wall. And I was following Baba's journey, you know, day by day. And this time I looked at the map and I said, well, they must be getting into Oklahoma now. And then I saw this little town, Prague, and I said, that's interesting, you know, the infant Jesus of Prague. I said, that's a funny name for a town in Oklahoma. And the next day was the day of the accident. And I go back to my office, and I look on that map, there was no Prague. And I called the girl in the office. I said, will you please look at Oklahoma and see if there's a town in there named Prague? And it was not on the map. So I had seen it somehow. And, but Baba did recover sufficiently that he gave us all a chance for another darshan in New York at Ivy Deuce's place. But before he came, he wanted very much to stay in a particular kind of place. And he gave these details. It had to be 20 minutes from New York. It had to have a garden that nobody looked over, and this and that, room for 18 people, and all sorts of stuff. And everybody was going bananas looking for this place. And suddenly I remembered this friend of Jean Adriel's that I had visited just once in Scarsdale. And I thought of her in desperation. I said, well, what can I lose? I'll call her up. And I called up. I said, Kate, or Ferris was her name, Mrs. Ferris, would you like to loan your house to Mayor Baba? And she instantly said yes. And I hadn't seen this woman for 2 years. She never came to meetings or anything. So, and then I phoned the details to Myrtle Beach, and Baba, you know, back and forth, he accepted it. And then he said, Phyllis has to get the place ready. And I thought, my God, I'm the worst organizer, the worst housekeeper, the worst everything. So and I only had a few days, and I had a new job. I'd only been on the job about 2 weeks. And I had to leave all the time and go to Hartsdale and get beds and fans and find a maid and this and a cook. Anyway, it was a big thing. Other people helped, but you know, you want everything just perfect for Baba, and they were coming with ill people, and you had to have special this and special that. It was a commotion. And Mrs. Ferris was one of these very nervous people, you know. And it was her house. And I thought, oh my golly, you know. And I got my mother's old cook and another friend of ours to be a cook there and all that. Anyway, Baba comes. And that, of course, was a big shock to see Baba in a cast, in a wheelchair and all that, you know. And then Baba did, no sad things, Pat. In fact, when he was out on the lawn, and that was an interesting thing about this house, all three families that overlooked the garden suddenly went on vacation. So there was nobody overlooking. And Baba started to tell me about the accident, and he beamed at me. His eyes sparkled. And he went like this. America's been after my blood for a long time. And then he gave me the chance to wheel him around. And I picked up this wheel, chaise lounge, and I couldn't lift it. It was like trying to lift the rock of Gibraltar. For a moment, Baba kind of gave me an occult feeling of the weight of the world. I mean, and then it lifted. And of course, Baba was a very slight man. It wasn't hard at all to wheel him around. But it's just a sort of a little glimpse there. And then there was another little story about that time. Also, Baba had said he wanted a boy to take care of him between the ages of 15 and 18 or something, who didn't know Baba and wasn't a Baba lover, but he had to be quick and intelligent and all that. Nobody could find boys like that. All sorts of boys were brought to Baba. And Fred Winterfeld was grabbing boys from I don't know where, and I lived in Harlem then, and I got these two boys. One was a Puerto Rican boy, and another one a little Catholic boy wore a cross. And I took them out to Baba, and Baba interviewed these boys, and they were not strong enough for stuff. But I remember Baba reaching out and touching the crucifix on this little boy's neck, and sort of gesturing, and he made some answer about that was his faith. And I thought, how touching. Here's Christ lying wounded with his cast on, you know, and here's this little boy with his crucifix. You know, if he only knew. Although the other little boy I used to invite all these children on the streets in Harlem to come up to my place and play, you know, with crayons and stuff they never had. And this little other boy, Puerto Rican boy, Pito, he saw this picture of Baba in my room, and he said, I don't want to play in there. I said, why, Pito? He said, but that's the face of God. I mean, just spontaneous, you know, I never said anything. So I thought he deserved a chance to meet Baba anyway, which he did. So anyway, the question of the boy goes on, and finally the last day has come. Baba's going to arrive any minute. And I suddenly thought of my cousin, Keith, in Schenectady. I called him up and I said, Keith, what are you doing this summer? Oh, I'm painting the roof for Daddy. Oh, but would you like to take care of a very sick man? No, my Daddy's paying me good money. I said, but he's so sick. Won't you come? And I said, all right, I'll come. I said, but you have to leave at 5 o'clock tomorrow morning with Darwin's shot. But he did. Keith came. And the next time I saw him, he was sitting opposite Baba in Ivy's place. And he was a freshman at Amherst, you see. So he was very, you know, well, Baba, what is this stuff about God realization? And Baba was spelling on his board, it's like a headache. Unless you have a headache, you don't know what it is. And then he would ask my cousin, will you obey me? And Keith said yes. And Baba said, even if I tell you to do bad things? And Keith said yes. So he was writing this all home to my aunt, who was a very good high Anglican something or other from England. I said, what is this? Who is this? So she piled the whole family into the car and came down to investigate Baba. But so my whole uncle and all the kids got to meet Baba. And of course they saw Baba and they just thought it was good. And Keith was wonderful. Here he had to take care of Baba at night and all that. And this was still a time when Meher was not supposed to be looked at by men, and so he had to go like this, you know, and everything. And he accepted it just without, I mean, he was perfect. He really was wonderful. And Baba one time turned to him and said, "What are you going to do when you get out of school?" He said, "Be a doctor." He said, "No," he said, "I don't know." And Baba said, "Be a doctor." And now he's a doctor. Very nice doctor. So there were some interesting things. It was a wonderful privilege to introduce people to Baba. Next to meeting Baba yourself, the fun was always to bring someone up and say, "Baba, this is so-and-so," because you got all the love coming and all. And you would know, we knew all these people. See, Elizabeth and Irina weren't there at that moment to introduce people at this place of Ivy, so it fell to myself or Fred or someone who knew these people to introduce, but sometimes you were just absolutely stuck for saying something about them. You wanted to say the right thing. I remember this one woman, my mind went completely blank. I couldn't remember anything but her name. So, and Baba always liked an introduction. Someone asked him once, said, "Why do you need an introduction, Baba? You know all these people." He said, "For their sake, you know, to put them at ease." So I said, "Baba, this woman is a wonderful lover of God." Baba beamed. That was the perfect thing to say. And then there was old Mildred Kyle. She had heard of Baba. She'd been head of the Theosophy Lodge for 40 years and then had got up and said, "He is the Christ, he is the teacher of the New Age," whatever, all this Theosophy junk. And I am going to follow him. And you can follow him too. And only 2 people did. And anyway, she'd waited from 90 years old to 95, and those are scary years, wondering whether she's going to meet them. So she came in, and she said to Baba, "Baba, I'm so old, you know." Baba said, "So am I. I am the ancient one." And then there was another lady in our group, Frances Bombard, and she had a role in the, what is that, Barnum and Bailey, or whatever, circus, or forget now, big thing, where Annie Oakley traveled and did her marksmanship. And Frances Bombard was her opponent shooting, you know. And she was much better than Annie Oakley, but she always had to pull her shot so that Annie Oakley... So I introduced her to Baba, and I said, "Here's Frances, and she's an expert marksman, Baba." Now I would have said markswoman. But anyway, Baba said, "And so am I. I shoot arrows of love at the heart." You know, Baba always said the perfect thing. And then I remember there was one man who brought his little 3-year-old granddaughter. And they went in for an interview with Baba and came out. And I said to this little child, I said, "Who did you see in there?" And old baby said, "God." You know, children just had a fantastic reaction to Baba. It was fun. And then there was one boy who was rather famous for various other reasons in our group, Lincoln Action. We had discovered him living in a trash barrel in New York. Anyway, he'd come to Baba. And he came in, and he had a brilliant mind, and he'd studied everything. He used to spend his entire day in the 42nd Street Library reading every mystical master and teaching and everything. He was an incredible fellow. So he came in, and he asked Baba for a mantra. And Baba said, "I don't give mantras, but take my name, that's my mantra." It was really fascinating to watch the effect of Baba on all these people. And of course my father came, and he was very curious. He wanted to know whether Baba was a fake or not. You know, he was worried about his daughter. And my father was sort of an MC. He was always president of this club and that club and greeting this one and that one. And so I'm sitting behind Baba, you know, And I watched my father come in, and he said, "Oh, well, we're very happy, Mayor Baba, to have you in the city of New York." And Baba didn't say a word, you know. And my father sort of slowly runs out of steam, you know. It was a great moment. And then later in '56, he came again, and I didn't even know it, and Baba, you know, called my name, and he was like that. And there was my father at the end of the line. He'd come again. So, anyway, and there were a few people who reacted strangely to Baba and disobeyed Baba here and there. I remember one lady who shall be nameless, but Baba had told her, "This is the last time you'll see me for 700 years. So she went home and brooded over that. She didn't like that. So she thought she was going to change it, you know. So the very early morning before Baba, I think it was the last day, and Baba had invited me to stay overnight to help pack up the house after he left. 6 o'clock in the morning was a big bang on the door. And Rano goes to the door, and here's this lady. She says, "I want to see Mayor Baba." And Rano was shocked. I said, "But you can't, you know." Anyway, she went in, gave the message to Baba. Baba said, "No." And they went back and forth, "No." Third time, Baba said, "You know, 2 minutes ago it was like this, but you can't say anything." So this woman saw Baba again without saying anything. But she had a very rather unfortunate life after that. And this is not to put down anybody, but you just don't oppose your will to Baba, you know. Anyway, Baba did come again in '56, and that was really, each time you meet Baba, you're at, of course, a different stage. He kind of, you fill up with love, and then Baba chucks you out in the world again. And then your karma speeds up, of course, and then you meet him again, you're at a different point, you know, and so your relationship is a little different with Baba. This time we were allowed to meet him at the airport. We all stood there and watched Baba come through customs, which is, you know, you think, the avatar coming through customs. It was, you could see through glass there, and Baba waved at us. He was in a pink coat. And came down, and there was some lady there greeting some mucky-muck big shot from Israel. And she saw all of us. She watched Baba greet us, each one, with such love, and she said, "Who is that man? I've never seen anyone greeted with such love." And so, you know, even strangers were impressed with Baba. And then we had the privilege to be with Baba the whole trip, from New York to Myrtle Beach to Los Angeles and then San Francisco. It was like 2 whole weeks of darshan. And so many things happened. I did write this up as the journey of the heart. But you just can't tell all the things that happen, even to yourself, never mind, you know, 200 other people. But you try, and there were many, many touching incidents on that '56 trip. Baba was here with us at the center, and it was very hot. It was July, and Baba would look very worn in the morning. He'd say, "The burden of the universe is on me." And this one particular day was July 26th. And Baba really looked worn out, and there'd been a terrible thunderstorm that night. And in the morning, we were all standing very silent down in that circle there. And Baba stood first in the east, and we stood opposite him. This was at his direction. And he went into his universal phase, where his face looks very drawn, like one of these Spanish Christs, you know, with all sweat. And he was working with his fingers. And then he made a shift. He went to the south, we stood at the north. Then he went to the west, and we stood at the east. He did the 4 cardinal points. It was very dramatic. And then it all broke up, and I think Ivy came along at that moment with these TV men and interviewed him, and a little bit of film, some of you saw. And there's a big long story about that. TV cameraman and trying to get that film. was another big commotion that Baba worked on. But then later, on the center we weren't concerned with news or anything, but off the center we found out that was the day of the Suez crisis. You see, every time we've been with Baba, there was some big thing also going on in the world. Like in '62, there was the Cuban crisis, like Delia showed in her film, and also the commies had come into India. And in '56, it was the Suez crisis. And I think in '58, when Baba was here, it was the French de Gaulle did something or other. I'm not up on my politics, but it was like some big crisis in France and the politics there. And so you felt Baba using you. It's like Margaret says, he takes your energy, your psychic energy. And that's true. You'd go through a whole day with Baba, and outside of the physical exhaustion, and the heat and romance, and the excitement, and the love, then Baba also pinched your energy. You felt like one of these musks that some energy had been pinched from it. But then you'd get it back the next day, you're all ready to go. And in '58, too, there was a moment where we'd been all day with Baba, and then he came back to this cabin again, and we're all in the circle there. Suddenly, very suddenly, he went into this very severe inner working. His eyes closed, and the fingers are going. It's absolutely still. And suddenly this one woman, I guess the pressure on her was fantastic. She screamed and yelled and shouted, "You have what I want!" And suddenly, like a bomb, she started racing for Baba. And those mandali just put up their hands, really. They are so trained in total, because if someone touched Baba, I think in that state he would be either killed or very severely injured. The energy that Baba is using at those moments. And there are always these moments. And like in Hollywood, Baba gave darshan at Mrs. Fuchs, 56. All these people came to see him. But just before they came, and I was seated right by Baba, he went like this, which he did several times in the trip. "I am the Christ. Undoubtedly, I suffer constantly for the universe, but my bliss sustains me." And it isn't a question of just saying it. You feel it. You feel he is the Christ. And of course there are those odd moments where you're with Baba in some airport or something, and all these milling people going by, totally oblivious to the presence of the avatar there. But not all of them. Like when we were saying goodbye to Baba in '56 at the airport in San Francisco. We'd been with Baba in intense savas for 2 weeks. We're drained, and it was a very weepy moment. Everybody was crying. And Baba was going around and doing like this, and patting Marsha, she always looked kind of serious, putting like this, "No, be happy." And this man came along, and he stopped, and he looked, and he said, "Who is that man?" And I was feeling really, gung-ho at that point. I said, "He's the Messiah." And he stopped, and he looked, and he said, "He very well might be." I thought that was... And then another person like that, I was outside of the room where Baba was giving interviews in the Hotel Roosevelt in Hollywood, the same '56. And this girl, we were all milling around there, lots of people, and Baba was giving darshan in the room. She came by and she said, "What's happening here? What is this?" She just happened to ask me. So I said, "The Messiah's in there." She didn't say anything. She said, "Do you think I could meet him?" And I said, "Yes, why not?" So I took her up to Adi, and he took her in, and she met Baba, and came out and thanked me. And I thought, what a wonderful, perceptive, instant reaction. Of course it was her karma. But, that's why I get a little impatient with someone who, bangs you on the head with a lot of theology why Baba can't be the Messiah. I said, you either get it or you don't. But it's karma, And then Baba came in 58. Of course, he'd had the second accident, and he was in great pain. Dr. Kenmore would tell us, you have no idea what the pain of that joint thing is for Baba. Just excruciating pain. But Baba never showed it. He was with us and gay and happy and all.
Excuse me, but what month was that in 58?
Again, it was in the summer. It was July into August. It was sort of the end of July and all.
Because we were here in downtown Myrtle Beach, sitting with our son who was in the Air Force, and we were there for about 2 weeks. And both Guru and I kept saying, there must be something deeper in Myrtle Beach than just those little golf courses. And we kept going for 17, looking back and forth for signs of some spiritual retreat, because in the north we were used to New Hampshire Camp Harvest Out, very special retreat where Frank Laubach and Jones, Glenn Clark,
oh, Glenn Clark.
Star Daly, Jones, you know those Sandy Jones. And we just had to decide to just go morning on the beach and run, and always ran north.
You felt Baba. I don't know whether the Myrtle Beach News had any thing that year. I know they did in 56 and 52. They had good material about Baba at that time. Well, sometimes people who didn't know Baba was there found out later that that was a very important time in their lives. I remember in 52, Baba gave darshan on the 26th, 27th, and 28th at Ivy's place. Much later, I met a girl who told me that she'd been in a cathedral, a church. Oh, it must have been about 3 blocks from there, from the studio, Ivy's place. And she'd had, on that day, she remembered the day, one of those days, I don't remember which, a tremendous spiritual experience in that church. And I said, well, what day was it? And she said, oh, it was such and such. I said, well, that was when Baba was giving darshan about, 3 blocks away. So, Baba, you could feel he would always say to us, while I'm sitting here with you, I'm working all over the universe. Or he'd sit with us in the barn and he'd go, oh, you've been with me since age. And you'd kind of get a tickle down your spine, how long ago you must have had some contact with Baba. And the memories of Baba are not in time, they're eternal. So they are not memories in that sense. You have to look back at something. They're there, they're ever present in a peculiar way. And I can see why, 700 years go by, it doesn't mean anything. That contact or love for Baba is just there. And all of you feel it here too. It's like there's something ever present, a real now, that doesn't get changed by time. In fact, before I met Baba, when we were driving down from New York with Fred Winterfeld, we passed the gate at the center. And we stopped the car, we knew Baba was there. And I felt like and it was literally that way sometimes with Baba, the whole creation just slow, still, like you get to the center of something that whirls, it's absolutely still, You felt this peculiar stillness that you were at the center of the universe when you were near Baba. I know people have asked me, and I was even asked on television with Joe Pine, why do you believe this man is God, And what do you say? But there were moments like that, just that feeling that when you stood near Baba or were near Baba, you were at the center of the whole thing. And, I don't know how to describe it, but it's just an occult feeling. A spiritual feeling. You also felt that he was in total control of Maya. in such total control that he doesn't have to show it. He doesn't have to show off like some yogi. And the biggest control is in your own life. Like if you have something, and this was true when we were all a bunch of people traveling with him or being here, you had a little sanskara you wanted to work on. Instead of calling you in and giving you a meditation or telling you off, you have bad tempers. No, Baba arranged a whole little scene, you know, using all the people there. You know, if you're jealous, if you're angry, if you want to quarrel with your wife or whatever, you know, Baba would bring up these things, and then with such energy, because the energy around him is so forceful, and then you'd have to live it through and then face it. And sometimes Baba would call you in and you'd have to work it out. And there are many, many individual stories like that. And one tiny one that happened to me was, I never thought I was a jealous person. I'm really not much on jealousy. But we were all sitting with Baba in the guest house. It was 52. And Baba turned around to Adele, my best friend, and looked into her eyes and said, "Oh, you have beautiful eyes like Babajan." And instantly I was just consumed with rage and jealousy. And Baba turned around, his eyes twinkled. And sometimes Baba would turn to you and say, "What are you thinking?" And at that moment, you know, you're having some awful thought. And so I had one of those times where Baba said, "What are you thinking?" You know? And I said, "I'm thinking of you, Baba." I figured, however lousy the thought was, it's still Baba. All thoughts are Baba. But anyway, Baba had all kinds of ways, subtle ways of working on your ego. It's like he said in England, and I guess it was 32, and some newspaper man interviewed him, "What is your specialty, Sri MeherBaba?" And he said, "The elimination of the ego." And as I say, Baba manages situations that chop you down. And one of them happened to me in 56. Ivy and I had gotten together, and we thought, well, this trip, we really have to document this trip. It's a shame that in 52 we really had very little. So we kind of split it up between us, and she and her Sufis were going to take a movie of Baba, which they did, and tape the talks, which they did. And I would take everything down in shorthand for the Awakener, because tapes are very, you know, unreliable and whatnot. So I did. And meanwhile, on that trip, Baba had brought messages that he dictated already in India and had been given to the Indian Savasis. And they were read all during the trip. And I had assumed, you know, that they would be in the Awakener. And Ivy had agreed to that, you know. So Baba would have, mostly Don Stevens got up and read one of these discourses, and then Baba would comment on it, and people would ask questions, so that it flowed along, you know. And then at the end of the trip, in the hotel in San Francisco, I saw Billy Eaton, this friend of mine, running around with manuscripts and stuff, and she was so busy she didn't even say hello or anything. I said, "Billy, what are you doing?" She said, "Oh, I'm typing this stuff for Ivy." I said, "What stuff?" "Oh, all the talks that were given. They're going to publish a book." And so I thought, oh, you know, my ego was crushed. It was not going to be in the Awakener. Ivy Deuce was going to publish it. And nobody had told me, Baba or anybody, you know. So I go back to my room and I feel kind of a little bit upset, you know. And then the very next morning, Baba called for me and all the people on the Awakener board. And I see it now. You see everything in perspective. It was like Baba being very kind and nice, knowing that I do publish the Awakener. He didn't mention anything about these discourses, but he kindly asked how the Awakener was doing, and we only had $40 in the treasury. He said, "Don't worry, I'll help you," and so on. So he was like compensating a little for this, taking away the discourses which are published in Life at its Best. So if you want to put together the discourses and what Baba said about them, you really have to read Life at its Best and the Old Awakeners, because Baba did comment. Someday I think they all ought to be together, but that's just a sideline. So my little publishing ego went, squunch. This way Baba got after me. But then kindly kind of made up for it by having a little meeting of the Awakens. And then finally, am I running out of time? Yeah. One more thing. We saw Baba again in '62, and that was again very different. Baba was quite remote from us all. We had gotten an invitation to an East-West gathering that said, you are not to ask me for any spiritual questions or any material questions. Well, that cuts out everything. And so we were just to enjoy his savas, his company. And it was a wonderful thing. We were there with 10,000 people. I think we were about, maybe 175 Westerners. And we were kind of spoiled. We saw Baba early in the morning. And then in the afternoon we were with the other thousands of Baba lovers. And to sit quietly in this tremendous group of lovers and with Baba, he didn't give any discourses, he just sat there. We listened to some lovely music. But that flow of love back and forth, it was just a biblical scene, really. A wonderful group of all kinds of people from everywhere. And Baba would interpret the Qawwalis and so on. And there was one wonderful moment when Baba said, the Qawwali songs are very spiritual, Baba would translate them. He translated this one of the Qawwali. He says, give me a few drops to drink from your ocean of love, It was typical. And he said, all your hearts are dry of love for God. But when I break my silence, I will fill the cup of your heart to the brim, and you may drink to your heart's content. And always remember that, because as Baba says, everything he says comes true, but in his own time. And he would say similar things to us. And the moment of parting from Baba was very, very touching. The last morning we were in Guru Prasad, and he had these wonderful musicians came to play. And at Baba's request, they played the bride song, which is some classic song in India, where the bride, she's joyful about her marriage, but she's sad that she's leaving her family, And the music is very affecting, and the words. And here we were leaving Baba, and that was the last time we saw Baba, actually, most of us, in the body, and we sort of knew it, And that was a very... music does speak for the heart at moments when words don't have anything, especially with Baba, because he was silent.